My name is Barbara Finley, and I'm a member of the Nevada Women's History Project. Today is Monday, August 7th, 2017. We are interviewing Dorothy Nash Holmes, current Reno Municipal Judge, first elected in 2010. Dorothy also has the distinction of being the first and only woman Washoe County District Attorney who served 1991 to 94. This interview is part of the Robert Z Hawkins grant that the Nevada Women's History Project received in 2016 to interview women of Nevada. Dorothy, why don't we discuss first your formative years, where you went to school, your family,
Okay.
where you grew up?
Well, I was born in Carson City. Actually, I was born in the hospital at Reno, what was then Washoe Medical Center. I was born in the hallway of the hospital because they barely made it. But my family was living out at Stewart Indian School. My dad was the football coach there and the dean of boys. And my mom always told the story that she was transported into the hospital in the back of a hearse because they weren't allowed to give services to white people, only Indians, at the actual Stewart School itself. And so the local hearse driver drove her into town, and so I was born in a hallway at Washoe Med, but not in a hearse.
That's good.
My dad was Bill Nash. He was one of the first sportscasters in the state of Nevada. Actually, he worked in gaming, but he worked at Channel 8 TV when that was the only one, and he pioneered high school football reporting. And my mother was Vicki Nash, and she was very involved in Democratic politics, and through the years she became a journalist and a writer as well. And so I was born when they were living out at Stewart Indian School, and then we moved to Carson City and then to Reno. And went to school here, Mary S. Doughton, down by the river. It's kindergarten, and then I went to Catholic school, St. Albert the Great, grades 1 through 8. Had Cuban nuns that were brought over during the Castro days and everything.
Right.
And then when all of my friends went off to Catholic school, I went to public school, first Central and then Clayton Junior High, because I wanted to go to college, and Minogue didn't have such a good record for getting kids into college then. So I went to Reno High, graduated there, and then took off to New York for college.
Very good. And after that, now you said, I believe you started your undergraduate work in Syracuse.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to be a journalism major, and I got a scholarship, John Ben Snow Scholarship, and that was the name of the journalism school there too, and did my first 2 years there. And then I ended up coming back and finishing in Nevada because there was a bit of a time in there where I eloped with a guy I knew for 6 weeks, and we came back to Reno, and so I did my last 2 years here at UNR.
And did you graduate with a degree in journalism?
I did, yeah, Bachelor's of Journalism, and my first job when I got right out of school was actually doing PR, public relations. I had interned with the Reno Gazette-Journal, the newspapers,
Right.
and I think it was just the Gazette then that I was interning with. And then I went on to law school.
Did you do that right away, or did you work for a
Yeah,
period of years?
I worked for 1 year after college, and I first went into court as requirement for a speech class up at UNR. We had to go watch somebody, and the then assistant district attorney was Cal Dunlap, who had been my sophomore history teacher in high school. I was 15, he was 25, so I knew him. We used to spy on him because he was dating a teacher that lived across the street from a friend of mine. So I went and watched Cal do a trial, and it was for speech, so we had to watch all of the mannerisms and everything, and I looked at that and said, I could do that. I could probably do better than he did. So I got the idea. I was working with an agency that was trying to get doctors out in rural Nevada. It was called Regional Medical Program. And the government cut the money. They cut the funding. And so I said, I'm going to go to law school.
All right. And then once you became a lawyer, how did your career path?
Well, all I ever wanted to do was criminal law. But the funny thing is, when I first went to law school, I thought I would do criminal defense. You know, when I was a teenager, they had those programs on TV about the storefront public defender's offices and things, and I thought I would either do that or be a big civil rights attorney. But I went to law school and I worked summer jobs, and one of them was in the public defender's office in Woodland, California, and that turned me into a prosecutor.
And you were going to law school over in Sacramento?
Yeah, I went to McGeorge. At that time, Nevada didn't have a law school. We were one of the last 2 states without one, so I went to McGeorge, and I worked in the daytime and went to school at night. So the night division was actually, instead of just 3 years long like regular law school is, the night, it's 4 years and 3 summers, so it was a long haul, but I had to work full time.
Right. And what did you do after you got out of law school then?
Well, my first job was in the district attorney's office. I came back and Larry Hicks hired me. I was the second woman ever hired, actually. The first was in the appellate division, and she did what they used to say women did all the time. She married up. She married a justice on the Supreme Court. And so it was a little bit of a long haul because a lot of the guys there weren't happy to see me.
And you didn't have those other aspirations?
No, not then. No, but I worked for 6 months or less in the civil division waiting for an opening in the criminal division, and then I had to do juvenile law for a year. So they all kind of referred to that sort of as, kiddie criminal law type thing.
Right.
And then I went into the criminal division. So I was there 5 years altogether.
And then when you left there, where did you go?
I went to Washington. I went to the State Department. A friend of mine from law school, she had married a guy from the State Department and ended up going to the State Department training herself, and they were traveling all over the world. And after 5 years in the DA's office, and I worked my way up, I was a assistant chief and then the chief criminal deputy. And by then, Cal Dunlap was the DA, and I just wanted to travel. I wanted to get out of Reno. I wanted to go someplace else,
Right.
I went for a short time and then came back, and I went again and came back. So I wanted to go again. And my daughter, at that time I was divorced, and my daughter, she was young enough to go and not old enough to be a problem like a teenager. So we went back to Washington, and I was in training with the State Department for a year to be a mid-level officer, consular affairs. And unfortunately, at the end of that training, I left because I got a better offer.
And what was that?
Well, I had met my husband on a pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, in Barbados when I was visiting my friend from law school. And he was supposed to have a job with his company. He did offshore construction. He was supposed to do that in Houston. I was going to be assigned to the American Embassy in Monterrey, Mexico. As a mid-level officer, I was going to be like the assistant ambassador, which sounds all highfalutin, but really wasn't. And it was going to be perfect. And then his company got a job in Paris.
Ooh.
And I could not break my assignment. I tried anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, and they said no. So at the end of my training, a year's training, I resigned, and we came to Reno and got married a couple of weeks later. So 10 days later, we were living in Paris.
Okay, and how long did you stay there?
Well, we were there, my daughter and I were there with him a year. He was there a year prior to us, and things were just starting to heat up in the Middle East, and the project they were building and designing was in Kuwait. So it was a little bit tense at that time, but at the end of that first year I got pregnant and we moved to Kuwait.
All right, and how long were you there?
We were in Kuwait one more year. And at that time, our son was born there on Easter Sunday in the Middle East, and our daughter was 15 at that time, and Michael had adopted her. We got married on Saturday. He adopted her on Monday. Judge Gabrielli worked that out for us.
Very good.
But at the end of that year, and 2 weeks after Zach was born, all the terrorism started out in the Middle East, and there were hijackings and everything else, so we got out of there. We took a vacation for about a month in the UK and then came on back to the States.
Did you come back to Reno then?
Yeah, we did. Well, indirectly. We went to the Bay Area at first because I had the California bar and I was going to be able to practice there as well as here if I wanted to, but my husband's company had a subsidiary in San Francisco. And so he was going to be building bridges and things over there and working on earthquake reinforcing of buildings and things like that. So he went and got his master's degree in business while we were there. And I worked in the United States Attorney's Office there for a year, doing criminal prosecution of international drug smugglers. It was a pretty cool job.
Yes.
Then we came back to Reno.
Okay, and then did you go back to work for the DA's office, or what?
No, I was looking through my letters and things in preparation for this, and I saw the letter that I'd written to the U.S. Attorney in San Francisco, and I had mentioned that, well, I'd only been there a year, and I had wanted to stay longer because it was really an exciting job doing international narcotic smugglers. I had said that I had been asked by some people to consider running for district attorney, so I had to come back to Reno and become known again. I'd been gone for 5 years, and develop a constituency. And so that's what we did. As soon as my husband finished his MBA, the next day we moved back up to Reno, which was Christmas Eve.
Okay, now what year was that?
That was 1987, 87. So I worked for a year with two of my former compatriots at the DA's office, Bruce Laxalt and Don Nomura. They had set up their own law firm by then. And I worked with them for a year as an underling to them, which I was at the DA's office too. And then I got an opening at the U.S. Attorney's office in Reno. And I started doing international narcotic smuggling prosecution for them.
So the next chapter in your life?
Well, when I got into the U.S. Attorney's office here in Reno, that was really a dream come true, because what I always wanted to do was criminal prosecution once I started, and having done that in San Francisco, and that was a special organized crime branch of the U.S. Attorney's office. It was for international drug smugglers. And that was exciting stuff. I liked that. But then I had to leave and come to Reno. So I got the same job here, and did one of the biggest prosecutions that they'd ever done here. Ciro Mancuso, he had a group of people from Sierra College. Everybody on the ski team turned into dope smugglers from him. Oh, and so that was, leading a task force of 7 or 8 different federal agencies. And we did a huge prosecution, got search warrants where we picked up millions of dollars hidden in places all over, forfeited land in Hawaii and Colorado and in Squaw Valley and every place else. So that was really exciting, but I left that because I needed to run for district attorney.
In the course of your career, and you were involved in a lot of firsts in several of these positions, did you encounter much resistance or gender bias?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you call resistance. I was really the first woman to do prosecution in the DA's office, and there were a few men that didn't like that. There were a few cops that didn't like that. There were some incidents, there was some harassment and putting pictures and things on my desk and making comments like that. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's office, I was the first woman on the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force there. And that harassment was a little bit different. The guy that was the head of the task force used to comment on my legs and my clothing, and when they hired another woman, he wanted me to teach her how to dress like me, so she wasn't so frumpy, When I know I'm jumping ahead here, but when I was elected district attorney in Washoe County, Bill Raggio, who had written me a letter to get into law school and was a friend of my mother's, even though he was Republican and she was Democrat, Bill introduced me to the legislature. And rather than saying, I wrote a letter and helped her get in law school, he said, if her gams are as good as her mother, she's going to do just fine.
Yeah, he was a different generation.
Yeah, it was indeed. But in every job I've had, there's basically been some kind of head knocking with men who wanted to teach me how to do my job or didn't believe I could do it or just didn't like that women were doing that. And that's kind of the nature of criminal justice for the most part.
Now you served as the first woman district attorney in Washoe County. And then what else did you do during that time or after that time?
Well, I left the U.S. Attorney's Office after our big prosecution. I got that going. We got about half of them in prison. I left the rest of the case for them to finish up, and took another couple of years after that. And I did run for DA. I had to quit my job because of the Hatch Act. I couldn't have a federal job, so I was unemployed for the first time since I was 14 years old. And I was elected in Washoe County and did a few firsts there too. I set up the DA's office differently. I put in a program called Death Penalty Review because it was real arbitrary. Anybody that wanted to could seek the death penalty, and a case with exact same facts would have different results, and that's not right. So I changed that. I introduced some new policies and early case resolution, some giving discovery to the defense attorneys. They never used to get that. And
Right.
I gave it to them without a requirement of law to do that. A lot of the male prosecutors were mad about that. They didn't like that sort of thing. But I also made a real push to get the district attorneys, the deputy DAs, out into the community speaking and talking. And we sent people to the high schools to talk about drunk driving. They showed pictures of teenagers that got in wrecks and got killed from that high school. And that was a little bit of reality therapy. I worked with the community. We set up a program called the Gang Alternatives Partnership, which was to get gang kids to do something productive with themselves instead of just causing trouble and staying out all night. Yeah, one of the pictures was we set up midnight basketball, and the cops would come in and play. We set up a center down on 4th Street, and it was basically a 24-hour-a-day program, and we were in there teaching kids art so they wouldn't do graffiti, and we were got a boxing program going, got a bicycle club going, and the cops would come in after their shift, midnight shift, and play basketball with these guys. So we really worked on some things like that. And one of the things that I did that was so important to me was basically the first drug court grant, if you will, to try to get pregnant moms, pregnant women, sobered up so they could have clean babies.
Yeah. Now, your current position, you're a municipal court judge, and you've been that for several years now. And you've initiated a lot of programs there.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a full circle, if you will, because I spent years putting people into prison, and then I spent 7 years as the Deputy Director of Corrections after the DA's office. I spent 3 years prosecuting judges for the Judicial Discipline Commission while I was doing some private practice. And then I got elected to this position, and it's a 6-year term, and I started doing drug court there. Now, another judge had already started the program, but I took it from being a small DUI court to what now is basically a full-blown program. I have co-occurring disorders, which is mental illness and addiction. I have DUI and drug court. I have a young adult recovery court, and I have homeless inebriates. And it's pretty amazing work because you can take somebody that looks like this and turn them into this. This guy was in my homeless inebriate program. He was a union worker who hadn't worked in 10 years and had lost everything, and got his life back and got back on the thing.
Some of those stories could be really amazing and very satisfying, I would think.
They will. These are twin babies that were born to one of my young mothers. She was 20 when she came into the program and found out she was pregnant and had been a hard drug user. So, and she gave birth. 1 year we had 6 babies in our program, and then we put in a non-fraternization rule for all the young offenders. But I decided that I could really do the best work doing a continuation of what I'd started in the prison system, and that was correctional programming. That was trying to get people better.
Right.
97% of them get out. So get them educated, get them job trained, get them sober, get them mental health treatment, get them on meds if they needed to. And that's what we spent 7 years doing at the Correctional Programs Division. And then when I came to court and had the opportunity to use that knowledge to expand the drug court, we set up the first co-occurring disorders court, and it's grown from there.
And what motivates you to keep going?
I think knowing that I'm really helping people, knowing that it's making a difference. I've watched people get their lives back. I've watched people get their children back. I've watched people get their first legal driver's license in 15 years. And we've stumbled upon a good process that works. The therapeutic justice, they call it, the drug court, where you assemble a team and you work with them rather than just punish them. I saw so many people in prison that really didn't belong there. And, after sending them there for about 25 years. So that was a bit of a shock to me, especially the young ones. And I thought this was a way to make some changes in that.
What about people along the way who've inspired you or mentored you? Or how do you think you developed the aspirations you had, or
well,
took the path you did?
It's interesting. I was thinking about that because I really didn't have a role model as a woman lawyer. There weren't many of them. I was one of the first 100 women lawyers admitted to the practice in the state of Nevada. I think I might have been number 75, but it's been a while since they had that celebration, and I can't remember. But my mother used to tell me that I got the idea to become a lawyer because when I was 5 or 6 years old, I sat on the lap of Nada Novakovich at the movies. She was one of the only women lawyers in town. But my mom had gone to law school. She was involved in politics in California, and she was involved with the Young Democrats, and she was working at the Attorney General's office for California.
I believe you have an interesting.
I do. We found this we found this after she died in 2011 in a trunk, and this is a picture of her that was in the 1942 Los Angeles newspaper, where she was trying to bulldoze her way onto an all-male grand jury. And she had attended a couple of years of law school, one in Ohio and one in LA, and ended up marrying a guy whose brother got elected to the legislature, so they moved to San Francisco, and she attended law school for a little bit at Hastings, but she didn't finish. She came home from an illness at the hospital and caught her husband in bed with her best friend and moved to Reno and got a divorce, and never left Reno after that. But I never actually, she never said, go be a lawyer, go be a journalist. I just kind of saw her do these things. That she was always had a project. She taught at Girls State. She worked on the campaign to bring voting machines to Nevada. She was always working in these jobs, mostly that other women were not in. And
sounds like she was a pretty good model for you.
She was the example, yeah. She didn't, and that's what I say, I love to cook. She was a great cook. She never taught me a recipe. She just taught me how to eat good. So it was really by example.
How about any books or readings, other things that were important to you?
I don't know. Can't think of a particular book. I have some heroes that I kind of live by their example. I mean, sayings and things like that. I loved Golda Meir. She was one of the, first women prime ministers over in Israel. There was a saying that I heard her give in a speech. She wasn't the original author of it, but life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And that's kind of the story of my life. I was getting ready to go this way, and I went that way. I was going that way, and I went that way. I mean, I met my husband on a pirate ship in Barbados, and we were married 2 years later, I was going to be a defender, and I ended up a prosecutor. And I came back and ran for DA here. I mean, a lot of these things were not part of my plan. I was a journalism major, and I was going to write the great American novel. That's why I went to college in upstate New York on a journalism scholarship.
Have you had what I guess might be termed transformational experiences along the way, or?
Oh yeah, my first husband, who I was 19 when I met and married him. We were working at the Mapes Hotel during the summer, and he was 8 years older, and he was good looking and charming, and I ran away and eloped with him after 6 weeks. We think we're so smart when we're 19. But he turned out to be a very charming alcoholic. Who got ugly when he got drunk. And so 7 years, 9 months, and 18 days of being married to him, the only good thing I did get out of that was my daughter, wonderful daughter. And he was abusive. He was physically abusive. So I learned a lot about criminal law. I learned a lot about domestic violence. That's why that was kind of one of my projects when I was the DA. My daughter said that I taught her how to be a survivor from that experience, and I really think that was part of it.
Well, it sounds like that was a major life experience lesson that you learned.
It was.
And also, I think it sounds from your mother especially that you learned it didn't matter if other women were doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah, I never got the feeling that I couldn't do something. I never got the feeling that this was only for men. I mean, my daughter was 3 when I went to law school, and my then husband and her picked me up one day from law school, and she said, "What are all these men doing? I thought law school was just for women." And so that was her orientation. You know, that was the kind of the life that she saw.
Any other, I don't know, I guess life's lessons that you might want to share that you've learned from your experiences? And
yeah, you know, when I was district attorney, I was 40 when I decided to run. So I was still pretty young in my career. I'd only been a lawyer for about 15 years. And again, the first woman and the only woman since then. But I really went in with high standards for myself and a lot of things I wanted to accomplish, and projects and a high standard of excellence. I think I hired anyone that ever used the word noble in their interviews, you know, because that's how it felt to me, you know. I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who said that there is no God higher than the truth, and I believed that, and I really believed in the rule of law. All through my first year of law school, I watched the Watergate, thing on TV for a whole year. But what I found out was that not everybody is as obsessed as I am, or as perseverant, or maybe even has had the training and skill. I really had to become more of I don't want to say generalist, but I realized that you can't push everybody to be like you, and you had to find a job for people at their skill and at their level and at their understanding. And everybody, you know, because you were a good trial lawyer didn't mean you were a good manager. Yeah. Because you were a tough guy didn't mean you didn't cry when you had to go to a murder scene or something. So I think I really learned a lot about the nature of people. I also learned that I hate politics. I've always hated politics. My mother was always in it, but that was the only way to get the jobs that I wanted to do. I never wanted to be governor. I never wanted to be attorney general. I wanted to be the district attorney. But it was pretty nasty business. There was a lot. I won when I wasn't supposed to. I beat the guy that everybody, all the good old boys here wanted to win. And I got a lot of harassment from some of the male judges. And one of them was, I spent about 2 years getting him out of office. And I think it was probably one of the best things I did. But it was tough. It was tough, and it was lonesome.
How would you like to be remembered outside of your importance to your family?
I don't know. Like I said, my daughter said I taught her how to be a survivor. I think the approach I've taken to everything I've done was really to be a problem solver, to try to make a difference, to try to make everything that I was doing better than it was before. I think you kind of lose your patience for a job when you realize that you could do better than your boss is doing. I think that's probably motivated a lot of people to run for office or to take a higher job. But I feel like I have made a difference in everything that I've done. You know, we did the program for pregnant women. We got 79 clean babies from mothers that were addicts that first year, and that was an experimental program for 1 year when I was the DA. The drug court work I'm doing now is amazing. It's really feels the best as one of the things I've ever done. When I was doing criminal prosecution, I got to do some amazing things on a big scale, especially with the feds, and that made a big difference. You know, everybody thinks marijuana prosecution's no big deal, but when you bring in a ship with 20 tons of marijuana on it and you send kingpins to prison, that is a big deal. So I've always wanted to make a difference, and I think I'm in a position where I have, and I still will for a few more years.
Do you have a message for young women?
Maybe to just be flexible, be aware. Don't be afraid to take a leap of faith. I thought when I was a kid that all I had to do was survive high school, because high school can be brutal with teenagers, and that's what I tell my granddaughter now. Life doesn't really begin till you're 25. Of course, then I got married when I was 19. Had my daughter when I was 20. But I think have your plan in, but be flexible enough to change when you need to. Like I said, I started going left and ended up to the right. I zigged and I zagged, and I never thought I would end up in the State Department or living in Paris or having a child in Kuwait.
Any memories from Paris that you still stay with you?
It was fabulous. I would go back to Paris in a minute. I loved it. I actually was kind of trying to live the movable feast kind of thing. I did some short story writing, creative writing while I was over there. I couldn't work because I was on my husband's visa. So I worked at my daughter's high school at her library, and I went to a writer's group and had my cafe au lait in the morning, and it was wonderful. It was a great experience.
So you still think you might pursue the writing?
I think so. I for a while, that's my goal, was to be the great American novelist, to write the stories. And then for a few years I thought I'd failed because all I did was go into law, and then I realized I'd been writing for 40 years. I've been writing in the legal context, and my journalism taught me how to do that very well. Concise, to the point. I think I have a couple of novels and a couple of historical stories in me, and that's what I plan to do when I finish. I think I'm going to finish this job at the end of this term. I just got elected for another 6-year term, and then I'm going to start writing.
You mentioned that you never wanted to be a politician, but of course running for the DA's office, and also in this state you have to run to be a judge.
Yeah.
So there is a difference between being a politician sometimes and being a candidate and having to campaign, and how did you deal with that?
Well, when I was a kid, my mom was involved in politics, and she ran Grant Sawyer's Reno office, and 7 or 8 years old, she had me out with my little white gloves and my little shoes and my little white socks, and I had to be out handing cards at the door, knocking on doors, and I hated that. I just thought that was horrible. And then growing up, we were always dragged into some kind of an event for the Democratic Party or for even the Republicans, believe it or not. They spoke to each other a lot better back then.
Right.
Bill Raggio, Paul Laxalt and Bill Raggio both wrote me letters to get into college and law school. But, and then I had to become a delegate to the Democratic Convention, and I just said, I don't want to do this. This is awful. And then what do? I end up being the first woman to ever run for district attorney in Washoe County. and then end up 20 years later, I said I'd do this once every 20 years, whether I need it or not, running for municipal court judge. And this was something that, it wasn't a spur of the moment thing, but I'd been prosecuting judges for 3 years for misconduct. And I think it was a little bit of, I can do that. I can do better than that. I'd practiced law for 25 years, and then I'd been in correction, so I'd seen the full circle of it. So I think there's a way to be a public servant without being a politician.
Right.
And that's really what I've always strived to do, was to do things to make the system better, to make people better, but not get involved in the politics too much.
Yeah. What do you think would be the final thing that you'd like to convey to people who are watching this oral history?
Well, I don't know. I have a granddaughter. I have a niece who was a prosecutor, and now she's been in private practice for a few years. I was hoping she would be the second woman district attorney, but she's gone in a different direction. I just really want children, women, and men to know that they can do what they set their heart on doing. It may not be what you think you're going to do when you're 6 years old. You may not be a fireman or a cop or a nurse or whatever, but you can do it, and you can make a difference doing it. Times change so much now. I mean, the kids are doing things they never used to do. People are using drugs 20 years earlier than they used to when we were growing up. Life is so much harder now, and we've created so many more difficulties for ourselves, but you can make it good.
And sometimes you can get to that point eventually where you're doing what you thought you wanted to do when you were 12.
Yeah, and it may end up there. Who knows? I'm not sure. I do think that I've honed my writing skills after 40 years of writing about the law, because that's pretty specific, and we
Yeah.
use a lot of highfalutin words as lawyers and things. I am teaching. I teach in the online master's program at UNR. I teach some courses in terrorism and in about specialty court, and I really enjoy that as well. So there may be some opportunities.
Sounds like you're making a lot of contributions
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. I hope it's not over yet. I hope I'm still making history. I think maybe one of the things that I'd like to say to young girls is be open to the possibilities. You may not always know what you want to do. I didn't know I wanted to be a writer when I was 6 or 7. I knew when I was 18. I never thought I would be a lawyer. I never thought I would be a judge. In fact, I didn't run for judge until I was 60 because I didn't want to get old and stodgy. I didn't want to have to lose all of my social life and my personal life. But I think you have to be open to the possibilities. I mean, I never thought I'd go to a pirate ship in Barbados and meet someone who turned into my husband. So you have to look around you. You have to see what interests you. You have to be willing to follow the leads that are kind of put down there for you. I don't think anyone tells us what to do, but you have to be willing to take the leap to go there.
Very good. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate it.